I've been a fan of the world of The Witcher for many years. I've read the entire book series several times, spent countless hours watching lore videos on YouTube, and have more playtime in The Witcher 3 than in any other game in existence. And yet, when Netflix announced The Witcher: Sirens of the Deep, I wasn't really excited. At first, it seemed to me like the streaming service was making just another Witcher project with no passion and with the intention just to milk more money from the already dying franchise Netflix was trying to create. Unlike most hardcore Witcher fans, I was introduced to Geralt of Rivia not through the books or the game series, but actually through the first season of Netflix's show back in 2019. I remember that I liked the season and didn't understand why the old Witcher fans were so unhappy with it. However, after reading the books, I was later able to understand just how much Netflix butchered the original story, both in the first season and in the following ones. I mean, they already had a loyal fan base and thousands of people around the world ready to watch the Witcher series thanks to the success of the third game. All Netflix had to do was just to create not necessarily an exact, but a faithful adaptation of the books, and the fans would accept it. Instead, they decided to create their own story, which had so little to do with the original plot, it felt ridiculous, and we all know how that turned out. Then came the absolutely disastrous Blood Origin, and later, Henry Cavill, the reason many people decided to even start watching the show in the first place, announced his departure from the series. After that, a large part of the audience stated they wouldn't continue watching the show without Henry anymore, and that there was no point in filming future seasons at all. So, by the time The Witcher: Sirens of the Deep was coming out, nobody really cared as much as they did in the old days, including me. However, the more information about the upcoming movie came out, the more it seemed like Sirens of the Deep could be an exception. First of all, Doug Cockle, the voice of Geralt in the games, was going to reprise his role in the movie as well. But what is even more important is that Sirens of the Deep is based on one of the best short stories from the books with an amazing plot, characters, and writing. I won't completely spoil the short story because by all means, you should try and read it by yourself. However, I feel a need to recap the most important moments from the books so that we can understand what Netflix did right with Sirens of the Deep and what not so much. The story takes place in Bremervord, the westernmost land near Temeria. The city is surrounded by water, so the sea plays a crucial role in the daily lives of its people and the city's economy. Geralt and Dandelion arrive here in poor financial condition and try to earn some money. Lucky for them, Dandelion is invited to perform at a wedding for some coin, and he agrees. At the wedding, Geralt gets a job as well. Turns out something killed the pearl divers, who went to the place that they definitely shouldn't have, and now the local monarch wants the Witcher to solve this problem because the economic state of the entire city depends on the pearl's production. Geralt agrees, and if you've started to think that everything will continue as a typical Witcher contract, I assure you that it is not the case. At the wedding, Dandelion introduces Geralt to his old friend, Essie Davin. She is a young bard with very beautiful blue eyes, one of which is almost always covered by her hair, which is why people also call Essie Little Eye. Since then, Essie becomes one of the central figures of the story, along with Geralt and Dandelion. Essie and Geralt develop an interesting relationship. Geralt likes Essie, but he cannot understand what exactly his feelings for her are, while what Essie feels remains unknown for a long time, even though she often blushes and sometimes gets nervous in the Witcher's presence. Geralt begins to investigate the case with the missing pearl divers. Together with Dandelion, he goes to the place where they disappeared with a mission to find some clues for the case. As the duo approaches the site, Geralt notices something unusual: a white marble staircase that leads underwater deep into the sea. However, the Witcher didn't have enough time to investigate the stairs. The sound of the bell came from under the water, and Geralt got attacked by some humanoid fish creatures, which, by the way, look pretty close to the ones that we see in the movie. Anyways, Dandelion escapes, but Geralt begins to fight with the creatures to win some time for his friend. Finally, Geralt manages to escape as well, but he receives a shoulder wound. Pretty serious by human standards. When Essie finds out Geralt is wounded, she immediately rushes to him and helps to treat the wound. The girl cares for the Witcher, and when Dandelion leaves them to meet one of his many girls, Essie and Geralt share my favorite moment from this story and one of the best written scenes in the book, in my opinion. I won't spoil every detail because, once again, you should read it by yourself. However, I will say that it was very fun to read the moment where Geralt, who is a cold-blooded professional and has killed the scariest monsters, by the way, begins to worry and gets confused when he realizes that the girl next to him is about to cry. When a local duke finds out there is an intelligent race living underwater, he decides to start a war against them to continue earning money from the sea, and because he wants to be remembered. Duke offers Geralt the position of a captain of his guard so the Witcher can help him to wage a war. But Geralt is not interested and refuses the offer. And that's all. In the books, he doesn't try to stop a war between the humans and the sea creatures. Waging war against other races is idiocy, as far as I'm concerned, he says. It might be a fine pastime for satiated princes, but not for me. Geralt is not trying to be a peacemaker. He just doesn't care, and the encounter near the shore where Geralt got his wound is the only time the Witcher interacts with sea creatures in the entire story, unlike in the movie. Anyways, Geralt, Dandelion, and Essie eventually decide to leave the city and split up. But before they do, they have an emotional farewell that I can't humanly spoil, and the short story ends. A Little Sacrifice is not about a war between races, but rather about human emotions and relationships. This is a story about how Geralt gets caught up in his own feelings and about the conflict between a cold-blooded professional and an ordinary man happening in the Witcher's head. Essie Davin honestly may be one of my most favorite and well-written side characters from the entire series. She is one of the few individuals who managed to wake Geralt's true feelings, which he was so desperately trying to hide. It was very interesting to see another unusual side of Geralt, and the story's finale, or rather the last few paragraphs, actually managed to make me sad. So going into Sirens of the Deep, I expected to see not Witcher contracts, but a depiction of the relationship between Geralt and Essie, since it is the main theme of A Little Sacrifice. Obviously, Netflix's decision to add new storylines is understandable, given they needed to create a full-length movie somehow. Besides, I didn't expect Netflix to capture the full depth and complexity of the emotions described in the story, but what I really wanted to experience was, as I said before, the canonical depiction of Geralt's emotions and inner conflicts rather than some epic monster fights. Now let's move to the movie. Spoilers ahead. First of all, Netflix made a lot of small adjustments to the original story. The wedding became a festival. The local duke I mentioned earlier was turned into a prince and stopped being an asshole. But these are all minor changes. The biggest shift Netflix made was adding an entirely new storyline set underwater. Let me remind you that in the books, we know almost nothing about the creatures living in the depths. We only see a couple of them, and the only things we do know are 1, they are intelligent, and 2, they are hostile. Sirens of the Deep takes this further, introducing a whole royal family under the water and the creatures that serve them. Once again, I'm not saying this is necessarily bad. I would have forgiven Netflix for even bigger changes if they hadn't ruined Essie as a character. Now, on to the most pressing issue. Essie feels like a completely different character in Sirens of the Deep compared to the books, and that is objectively a problem. Everything starts off fine, but then Netflix completely forgets about developing her character. We don't get any real depth to her emotions. Essie behaves the same way at the beginning and the end, and her relationship with Geralt barely changes at all. To me, she feels more like a Giga Chad than a girl struggling with her own feelings. Netflix took their time to show the underwater world, but they could have used it to focus on Essie and Geralt instead. Overall, it's fair to say that Netflix ruined one of the best side characters from the books. They decided to focus on a war between humans and fish-like creatures, and I get it, a mainstream audience wants to see action in a Witcher movie. However, Sirens of the Deep is an hour and a half long, and that time could have been used much better. Netflix shouldn't have taken a story centered around 2 characters and blown it up into a conflict involving a bunch of characters we didn't care about. Most of the movie's runtime is spent on this war, with Geralt trying to stop it, but as someone who has read the books, this entire subplot just feels boring and unnecessary. The animation and sound design are still pretty decent though. In the end, I didn't get what I expected. As an adaptation, this movie doesn't work. Netflix took one of the best short stories in the entire franchise and turned it into something unrecognizable. As a standalone story, it might still be okay, but as an adaptation, it completely misses the main point of A Little Sacrifice. It feels like the writers didn't even read the original story and instead based the script on a brief summary. Essie, the reason I wanted to see this movie in the first place, completely fades into the background during the second half, and the war plot just feels dull. Netflix doesn't change. If I had to rate this as an adaptation rather than a standalone movie, I'd give it a 4 out of 10. but as an independent work, it kind of works, I guess, given that some online reviews from people who haven't read the books are pretty positive. Thanks for watching. Now go read A Little Sacrifice, for God's sake.